Hello and welcome to PFL's online learning community, and this session is about supporting children return to early years services. I'm Sandra and I'm the early years mentor, and I'm going to talk you through this presentation which was delivered online on June 4th, 2020. So the aim of this session was to give early years educators some food for thought for planning the return of children and staff. So at this moment in time, there was guidance announced recently, very recent in advance of this presentation, around some health and safety guidelines regarding pods, etc. But this presentation is not going to look at that information at the moment. That information is going to be covered at a separate session. This information is some reflective points for educators to consider when they are preparing to return, and it's more about placing some theory into practice, some practical advice. And again, PFL early years team are available for mentoring support. So if you are an early years educator or manager working in a early years service under the Northside Partnership catchment area, please do reach out to us if you feel like you would like some one-on-one advice or one-on-one support in regards to anything that's been discussed in this session. Children are naturally resilient. So this is something that is said or has been said many a time, and it's something that if we believe, then we are going to return to work with the assumption that no matter what children experience during lockdown, that they'll be able to bounce back and they'll be fine when they return. And it's just not true, because children are not naturally resilient. Children build their resilience by experiencing challenges or stresses, but while having those experiences, they are supported before, during, and after with safe and loving relationships. So it's not true. We are busting the myth. And we have to be mindful that we are helping children to build resiliency and to become resilient. And so with this in mind, we have to think about when children are coming back to our service, are they going to leave at the end of the day feeling more resilient or depleted? And so we have to think about how will we make every effort to not add to the impact of COVID-19 for children. Because to assume that children and all of us are just naturally resilient then is dismissing the experiences or the challenges that they may have had. And we were all in the same storm. We did all experience a pandemic. We all experienced restrictions and lockdown, but we weren't all in the same boat. We didn't all have the same challenges and experiences. So we have to think about that children are coming and they would have had a variety of different experiences during this time. Loss of routine, being confined to the home, limited interaction with friends and extended family, being in homes where parents were scared, stressed, under pressure, trying to work from home, loss of a job, loss of a family member, um, and many other adversities that could have presented during this time. And it's not to focus on all those negative things, because there is room for adversarial growth. And it's about then when we realise that no, they're not naturally resilient and there is a role I have to play in building that resiliency, then we are going to help children to manage this transition back a lot better. So we do have to consider what have children's experiences been during lockdown, what they might have been. We might not know, we might not ever find out, but we have to assume that everyone has had an experience and that this transition back is going to be difficult regardless. How could you learn more about their experiences? So maybe is there something that you might do in advance of them returning, of connecting with a family and just seeing how has it been for you, and do you feel like there's anything we should know about um, that we can help with and that we can support with when your child comes back? We're not asking you to pry, and people might not be forward with how they managed, because it's difficult to for anyone to say that they haven't managed well. But look, it's something that you can offer. You can create an opportunity for that conversation to be had. But still, that's not to say that we have to know what happened to children in order to support them. We don't. We can work with what happens when they're with us. But we do have to consider that How will the impact of these experiences, whether they're known or unknown, present in children's development and behaviours? And by knowing that, then we know what are we going to find difficult about that, and how are we going to respond to that in a way that helps them to leave at the end of the day feeling resilient and not depleted. So I have a list that I'm sure there could be many, many other items that I could have added, but again, I'm just bringing some awareness to the fact that children are going to communicate through their behavior of what their needs might be, of how they're feeling, of how they're managing, or if they're struggling to feel safe in the environment or cope with the transition well. So here is just a list. So struggling to manage their emotions. I mean, managing your emotions is already a huge ask for a child in an earlier service because we have to think about where they're at the stage of brain development. And as a human being, emotions are a very important part of our lives. So, but in saying that, you might have had a child who did manage and regulate their emotions quite well before, and now you notice that that's very different. Or you might just have every child coming back and they're struggling to manage the ups and downs of this transition. And you have to be aware that that is normal, that's okay, and what are you going to put in place around that to help them to cope with some of those big emotions. They could be more reactive than before. So the smallest things might be setting them off because they are adapting to a huge transition again. They might need to feel in control because when we feel unsafe, we need to find some way of feeling in control of a situation in order for ourselves to feel calm. And that can look very different for children. It can look like not responding to requests. It can look like defiance. It can look like just withdrawal from an engagement. It can look very different, but just know that children, some children, are going to be just looking for ways to feel more in control of a situation because that is what's helping them in that moment to feel okay. You might have children who are hesitant to engage or connect. And again, think about all the talk about social distancing, that we can't be with people, we have to stay well. So children are going to carry a lot of that in and could possibly be trying to stay away from people because they are trying to keep themselves safe. They could have difficulty with separation from their parents and caregivers because they have been with them for so long. They could have loss of skills. So children who are experiencing stress, um, a, a kind of a result of that, or sometimes a side effect to say, would be a loss of some skills. So you might notice children that had skills when you last seen them in March, but those skills aren't there anymore. And it's remembering that that's okay and that there's a process of helping them feel safe and secure and then rebuilding and relearning and teaching some of those skills. Learned behaviors and learned strategies, of course, because they've been at home. They might have tried out and tested different strategies to do or get certain things, and they have worked well for them, even though they might not have been appropriate, and they're going to come back with some of those. And that is part of being a child as well. And we have to, as adults, be flexible and open to knowing that and helping them find and learn those more appropriate strategies. Um, they will be struggling with routine because they have been struggling without a routine, possibly during the past few weeks and months. They could be testing boundaries because, again, they want to feel in control. So sometimes testing a boundary because they want to be the one setting the boundary can happen, or the fact that it's just so unsettling and so it's such a change that they just cannot manage the boundaries. And that is why consistency matters in terms of setting boundaries. And children could get fatigued quicker than usual. And when children are fatigued, I don't mean that necessarily they are falling asleep, but just that worn out, low mood. So decision making can be difficult. Asking them to follow instructions can be difficult. Expecting them to get through the whole day can be very difficult. And again, that could lead to behaviors to communicate that I'm tired or I'm not managing this very well. So these are all things that we have to think about. And so, how our brain and body manages stress. So, all of those behaviors is a form of communication of managing the change, the stress of the experiences that they've had. And For those in our Strengthening Foundations of Learning program, we talk about in more detail about the brain, how the brain develops and how it operates and how it manages and responds to stress. And so one of those something that we're going to look at here is about the stress response. So you can see here in the middle a rainbow state. That rainbow feeling of everything is good, everything feels okay, and I feel ready to go. And when they're in this zone, they can think clearly, they can listen, they can learn to express emotions or seek alternatives. They're very responsive, very engaging, can be cooperative, they're ready to learn something new or different. This is the perfect place we want children to be. And when children are in this space, they can follow the restrictions that we need to put in place really well. They can understand the new rules a bit better, and they feel more comfortable with us. But this might not always be the case, okay? Because as we've said, experiences means a lot of processing, means behaviors that can happen, and the transition alone can create a lot of stress for the brain and for the body. And what that can look like is hyperarousal or hypoarousal. So that fight or flight response, like the boiling, steaming kettle. So when triggered children's alarms go off, they're more sensitive, they're more reactive, they're unable to regulate their emotions and focus and pay attention. And their response can be a physical fight. And it doesn't have to be, fisticuffs. It can be kicking, pushing, screaming, biting, pinching, pulling, that physical response, or the flight response, again, a physical one, which is fleeing, running away, hiding. I'm sure you're probably thinking of the things that you've seen children do in this moment. Or a hypoarousal again is just freezing, withdrawing, zoning out, spacing out, and not taking in any information at all. So what we need to do as educators is be aware that these can be the states that children are going to go to probably much more frequently and much easier than normal at the start of this transition. And what we want to do is create environments and create interactions that help children to feel like this rainbow, feel okay and feel safe so that they are having the fullest experience of their day, they're building resiliency and they're not leaving depleted. So what triggers could be present in our environment? So sometimes, like I said, we don't always know what that child's experience will be, and so we won't always know what the trigger might be that can move children from that rainbow state into the iceberg or into the boiling kettle type moment. So this is just an example of some things in environments, especially in early years environments, that can be triggers for children. Um, and I'm just going to let you read through some of them, and apologies for it being blurry because I did take this from a book. But if you just have a look through the list there, you'll see that these are all things that can happen every day, all day, every day. And so that is why triggers can happen very easily, and it might not always be known to us, and we might not know why things are happening for children, but it could be something as small as a change in the lighting in the room. It could be something like tickling a child. Like you might think that every child loves a tickle, but look, they don't. Even a tone of voice can be something that is a trigger for children. So look, I would advise that you just kind of have a look through these and think about these are the things that could trigger dysregulation, and how might you either prevent or just manage some of these. So what I would say to anyone is that safety for the body and mind first, learning will follow. So this is not about catching up, and it's not about coming back. Like we are coming back, but we're coming back to something different. So what we need to make sure that we are doing as early as educators is creating a secure base, a secure and safe place to be, and a safe haven for children of healthy, safe, consistent relationships that help us to build back up our resiliency and manage this transition back better so that down the road we can get back to all of our fun learning of skills, of strategies, of topics and content, etc. So I'll start with secure base. So again, there will be health and safety considerations that will either define some of how the secure base will look like or limit, I don't know. But that is always something that has to come first, and I know that. But again, it's around what can we do and using a strengths-based approach to create environments that don't feel sterile, that feel safe. That we allow a gentle introduction to routine. So we can't open our doors and expect children are going to come back and be able to follow the day that they last did back in March. Okay, so it has to be a gentle introduction to routine. And I would ask, do you know what your routine is going to be? And it doesn't, I obviously don't mean a minute by minute routine, but some type of structure to a day. Can it be visually presented in the room? Can it be shown to children that this is what our day will look like? And that we allow freedom and flexibility within the day. We know that children are going to struggle at the start. We are flexible. We allow freedom to explore while also being mindful of our health and safety considerations, of course. But we have to allow some freedom and flexibility for children to readapt. Boundaries will be important, and they always are, because boundaries help us all feel safe. If there's rules and we know them, we know they're there to keep us safe, it helps us feel calm. So boundaries are important, but again, setting boundaries that are um, communicated well and that are maintained with compassion, and that transitions can be kept to a minimum. So again, it's around not, you're not going back to that day that you would have back in January, February, March, where there's lots of movement and transitions and children can cope with them really well because they've gotten used to them since September or before. That might not be the case. So can you keep transitions to a minimum? And where transitions will happen, that they are communicated and that children are part of the transition. And the safe haven is the focus on rebuilding relationships. So that's going to be, as an early years educator, your focus is on rebuilding and reconnecting relationship. That adults will be flexible and responsive. So you're going to be flexible. You need to let go of some of the things that were important to you before or important to the room before, and be open that things will have to be different for some time, and you'll have to be responsive and not reactive. There will have to be agreed boundaries and expectations among the adults. And for example, I mean, if there's a boundary in the service, that they're agreed upon by all adults and that all adults keep those boundaries. So for example, if there's one rule in one room and a different rule in the other room, that can cause a lot of confusion for children, because even if they're not in that room, they can see things that are happening and they're saying, oh, well, why can't we not do this thing, but they're doing this thing? Or even the adults can come into conflict when one group of adults are doing something totally different to what the other group of adults have understood has to happen. Agreed responses to children's expressions. So I want to say their expressions. When they're expressing their stress, their needs, their difficulties through their behaviours, you need to have an agreed response to that. So when children are in fight or flight, what will be our agreed response to helping children manage that moment? When children go into hypo arousal and they're frozen, what will be our agreed response to get children back into a calm state? Or when children are about to get triggered, what will be our agreed response to help children feel safe? And that staff concerns are handled away from the children. So children have had to listen about COVID-19 and all of the negatives that have come along with that, I'm sure, in their homes and with their adults that they've been with at home, because they were conversations that had to happen, I'm sure, and they were confined to their home, so they would have heard a lot more than maybe they normally would have. So it is important that when children go back, that they aren't surrounded by these conversations again, and that they aren't picking up on messages that the adults here don't feel safe or the adults here don't know what's happening, because even if they don't know what you're talking about, they can feel and pick up from vibes, from language, from body language, from tone of voice. So we would ask that you really think about, when you have a concern, where is the right place to be having that conversation, and that it shouldn't be while you're with the children. And how will you communicate these new rules or guidelines that have to be put in place in your service to the children? So when you know, how will they know? We don't want it to become a negative experience and that following rules becomes stress inducing. So decide in advance about how you communicate the rules to children and how you're going to respond if and when they forget about those rules, because they will. So obviously first is, do you know the rules? So when you know the rules and you are feeling safe and ready to keep these boundaries in place, you're going to respond better when children maybe are not doing them. But visual communication of the rules, visual images, visual boards, visual reminders, and but making children aware of them. So when they come in, that from day one we're talking about, oh, look, and these are the things we have to remember to do today. We have to remember to wash our hands, and we have to remember that this is our new group that we're going to stay in. So keeping it positive and not adding on to fears or worries, but that children understand what's expected and what's happening. Verbal reminders, because when children are experiencing a stressful moment, their brain doesn't hold on to information for as long as it normally does when they're in that rainbow state. So think about, instead of the no or you can't or don't or stop, verbal reminders of, remember when we said we had to wash our hands? Remember we said we have to stay within this group today? So just verbal reminders of what they have to do or what they should be doing. Teaching rules through play. So there's lots of ways you can get creative about this. Of, if there's rules that we have to adhere to, let's explore them through play. Maybe with teddies, through role play, through games, etc. And positive redirection about what they can do. So again, when children are forgetting the rules or when children are not doing what they should be doing, that it's not an interaction that becomes very negative or stress inducing. It's something that is done in their best interest, but also in a positive way. So reminding them, again, the verbal reminder, remember to stay in our group, or what they can do. We can't go over there at the moment, but we can play over in this area. So before we go back, let's meet as teams and let's make our mission be security and co-regulation. So security, our mission is that children are going to feel safe and secure, and that we are going to be co-regulators of big emotions or behaviors or needs. And we're going to co-regulate and help everyone, including ourselves, feel safe and calm. So number one, again, remember that calm is contagious. So when you feel calm or you're presenting yourself calmly, then children will see that and they will also feel more calm. If children feel anxious and then you feel anxious, that's going to escalate. If you are anxious and the children were calm, children are going to become anxious. So please think about, how are you going to manage your own anxieties? Because that's really important. It's really important that our days are full of repetition, predictability, and consistency. So each day shouldn't be so different than the day before, because that's not going to help children feel calm and readapt and readjust. And we need consistency. So if there was a limit in place today, that limit is in place tomorrow. And if it's not, if a limit can be lifted, that we are communicating that to everybody. So there's consistency throughout our practice and throughout our service. That we are self-aware of the behaviours that can challenge us as educators. So we are going to have some people who handle and cope with the sounds of cries much easier than someone else, and that's for our own personal reasons. We all have triggers within ourselves and emotions that make us feel uncomfortable, and that's human. But when we go back to being with children, we need to be aware of, what behavior am I going to find difficult and how am I going to manage that within myself so I can be really responsive to that child? What do I need to do about that? Mirroring children's feelings and naming them. So it's always a great way to regulate. So when children become dysregulated, you need to regulate them back to that rainbow state to get them to feel calm. And a way of doing that is mirroring. So you can guess what they feel or what they might be thinking, and you can mirror that in your facial expressions, in your tone of voice, and name what's happening for them. And instantly children, whether they're verbal or non-verbal, whether they speak English or have a second language, they're going to connect to that visual expression and that tone of voice and know that this person understands how I'm thinking or feeling at the moment. Remember the triggers in the environment that we mentioned in the slides previous. So just watching out for them, And I mean, you can't prevent all those things happening, but you might be able to say, oh, I noticed that when that loud noise went off, that child responded to that and was really upset. That's something I'm aware of now. So you're watching out for things that are triggering or signals coming from children after events have happened, and you're going to be able to build up an idea of what might need to happen to help the child manage those situations, or it could be something that could be prevented altogether. Opportunity for sensory regulation. I have a slide coming up about that. So if we want children to feel secure and we want them to regulate themselves, we have to have lots of opportunity for sensory exploration, sensorial play. And I don't just mean the Play-Doh, the water, the sand. I mean lots of moving around, pushing, active, lots of also quiet moments, listening to music, maybe smelling or tasting things, drawing or painting. So lots of time for that exploration and regulation. And again, agreed responses to when children have moved to fight, flight, or freeze response. So we don't want inconsistency. One adult does one thing, one adult does another, because children get confused. So there has to be a response, and that response should be that step one is to regulate that child to bring them back to a calm state, and then connect and reason with that child. So again, this is a slide that I borrowed from our fabulous play therapist, Amy Fogarty. So if you want to take a picture of this, I'll leave it on the screen for a minute, but these are just the different areas, sensory areas and ways that you can provide that sensory processing moments for children within your service. For some children, children who go into the fight or flight, they might need more physical sensory responses, and then the children who go into that more frozen mode need the quieter, calmer, more gentler sensory experiences to come out of that state. So they might need things like the humming, the singing, the gentle patting, or noises or smells, things like that. So make sure that children can express their feelings. So children might not have that verbal skill, the emotional literacy and language to express how they feel the way that adults might do. So have methods, resources, materials, and make them aware of ways that they can express themselves and express their feelings, so that they start to identify the feeling within themselves and express it to you. That we have spaces for children to be, spaces that are specifically for noisy, active exploration. And so it's okay to jump and bounce and scream and shout and be busy in this area, and that's fine. And then there's an area where if I need a break, if I need quietness, calmness, quieter activities, that there's a space for that as well. That there is open-ended play and sensory play. And don't let the guidelines limit that. So yes, of course, there's going to be some things that you won't be able to do at the moment, but get creative around, well then what can we offer, or how can we offer it differently? And even this little photograph of the children with their individual bins. So that could be something you might think about. And it doesn't necessarily have to be always the Play-Doh or the messy play. Sensory play can be like the things on the list. It can even be just going outside, jump in puddles, stomp around, scream, shout, twirl, spin, push walls, that type of thing. It doesn't always have to be water, sand, Play-Doh. Visual reminders of what's happening or what should happen. So most people do have visual routines. They might have to be adjusted, but making children aware of them and using them. And maybe you could make a visual board of how we stay safe in preschool. So rather than just all the things we can't do, all the things that we need to do in the day to stay safe in preschool, you might have visual reminders or visual images of what that looks like, and be using them to remind children, remember we said this is how we stay safe, by washing our hands. Or the I love this image here of the nursery and home. So nursery is probably a UK term. I think this is where I seen it on a UK website. But if we're going to have children who need to be in pods and smaller groups, and they're going to be with that same group, about making it clearer to them and easier for them to process and understand. And you might be able to do it like something like this, a visual, um, like a check-in, check-out. So who's going to be in our group today, and what adults are going to be in the group today, and who's not here today, who's at home. And it just helps children to process, okay, this is who's going to be here, these are the adults I'm going to see today. Okay. And as well, it creates a nice ritual for when they come in, because rituals are important as part of like that routine. So if every morning I come in, I say hello, and I go over to my check-in station and I check myself into my group and I have a look at who's there today. Sometimes having rituals like that at the start of the morning help children adapt and transition in and separate a little bit easier. So have that visual again to help children make decisions and choices. So when they're becoming a bit dysregulated, that you can say, what is it you would like to do? But they might not be in a state where they can verbally say what they want to do or make a decision about what they want to do. But sometimes having that visual image just helps them to connect with, actually, yes, this is what I wanted to do, and I can pick it out. And again, you can see with the pegs, you might need to limit play areas based on numbers. There might only be allowed 4 children over in the books area. So about making it clear, it's communicated really well to children. They're still allowed choice. So where would you like to go? Oh, look, there is already 4 in that area, and remember we said only 4 could be there. So where else would you like to put your peg for now? And giving children that I'm still able to make a choice, I still feel in control, but I'm abiding by the boundaries or the limits that are in place at the moment. And this is just a really, really important point to kind of bring this discussion to a close, is when the adults feel safe, the children will feel safe. So there is work that has to be done before the children arrive at your door. And that work is about you feeling safe as the educator, you feeling informed, you feeling that you know what's expected of you, and so that you can bring that calmness into the room so that children will feel calm when they arrive. Because we are asked to fill children's emotional cups all of the time, but we can't fill from an empty cup. So again, we think about, sometimes filling our cup is by having that knowledge and information, because when we know what's expected and what to expect, that helps us to feel safe and secure. And then there's also going to be other things like just keeping care of yourself and your well-being as well. But that will come into play. So these are just some reflective points for you. So think about, what are you going to find challenging about returning? So you need to be thinking about that now, and you need to be making a list about, what are the things I'm going to find really difficult for myself. And over the course of time before you go back, some of them might get answered, you can tick them off. And if not, then you have a list of very important questions for you that you can discuss with someone before you return to work. And while you meet your manager to do that induction back to work moment, you have a list of, yes, look, these things have been on my mind. Can they be managed, or what do you think, or what should I do to manage this for myself? As a manager as well, or maybe as a room leader even, you need to think about, how will the staff be made feel safe? And how will this be communicated to staff? So you might be able to say, there is going to be a space where staff can go to have conversations with other adults away from the children. If you have a concern, you come to my office. Like, there is no one size fits all answer here. And I'm not saying that managers are expected to know the answers of everything, absolutely not. But when there's a process or there is something to offer staff that says, look, an issue might arise while you're in work, but this is the recommended steps to take. That just helps staff to feel like they know what they should do, and also that they know what not to do. And what not to do is be having those conversations with other adults around the children. How will staff know what the priorities are? So as a manager, are you going to say, our priorities for our children is for them to feel safe and secure? So that staff know, I'm going to focus on safety and security. That's my priority, and health and safety is my priority. And my priority is not around catching up to the curriculum that we've missed out on, or having to get ready for school and tick off all these checklists, okay? So you need to decide that and communicate to staff so that they know what's expected. And as a team, you need to have an agreed and consistent approach to creating the safety and security. So what I mean by that is that you say, for example, you did decide, yes, it's really important that we have this more simplistic routine and we're going to be flexible and allow children to readapt. But then the room next door has a very strict routine. There's no flexibility and children are expected to know. That's not going to work. Okay, so there needs to be an agreed approach that everyone feels comfortable with and understands. And again, when you feel safe as an educator or a manager or whoever you are within the service, when you feel unsafe or unsure, what can you do? And I suppose a bit of that comes down to you individually, that when you notice your anxiety's rising, what are you going to do in that moment in time just to remain calm? And how are you going to make sure that it gets addressed? And it could be that you keep a little journal around, you write your question or your thought into that, and you make sure that at the end of the day, I express that to someone or I seek answers for this. But it's again, it's all around that it's not coming into the room with children as much as possible. And then as you prepare and as you share, people are going to feel ready for this transition back. So preparing as a team, what's going to happen? How will it happen? What happens when? So having those conversations together helps you to feel ready and helps you to feel sure about what you should do, what's expected to be done, or what you're going to do if a certain scenario arises. And then sharing with families, sharing with them what is going to happen when we come back, what's different than before, what's expected from you, what we need from you for this to work really well. Again, we can't expect people to follow rules that they don't know exist. And how could they begin preparing for the children's return? So you might say, it could be really, really helpful if you start re-establishing routine at home, but obviously in a very easy, gentle way, because then when children come back to our service, they're going to find that readjusting to a routine a little bit better. Or could you send photographs of what the environment's going to look like? Could they prepare by having little conversations about what school's going to look like when we come back? Okay, so just get creative, as in make parents feel and families feel empowered too, just the way you want to feel empowered about this, that they feel empowered and they can do little pieces at home before they go back to the service. And to end on a positive, because all of that is very information heavy and it's a lot to think about and it requires a lot of reflection. There's no denying that it will be a challenge, that it will be a learning process for us all, that there will be highs and lows and there will be successes and there'll be mistakes. That's okay as well. But it's also an opportunity to begin something new. It's an opportunity to focus on security and relationships. It's an opportunity to focus on adversarial growth, that sometimes things go wrong in life, but there is room to grow and become resilient for all of us, children and adults. So trust in the magic of a new beginning. And again, here are myself and Leah's email address. So if there is something that you would like more support on, more one-to-one support, a question, anything, please do contact us and we're just so happy to help. And our next session on June 18th is around supporting children in loss and grief in earlier settings, because that is something we have to think about, that children can be coming back after experiencing loss or grief during this time. And by you kind of knowing what you might need to know about that can help you feel more comfortable in responding to things that might happen, or needs that come about from experiencing loss and grief. Okay, so thank you for tuning in. That was a little bit of a longer session than usual, but I hope that there was something in this that you found either new and to think about, or at least it was things that you were already thinking about and now you just feel a little bit more reassured that you're on the right track. So thanks a million.